Hello, this is Brian with Team Pericles, and we would like to speak with you today about improving voting participation in American elections. Our proposals include making voting universal, expanding existing systems, and making Election Day a national holiday. Now, let's take a look at the problem. Low turnout is a danger to democracy. When all voices are not heard, many ideas and aspirations are left out. Americans have rarely voted above 60%, even in important national elections. And in state and local elections, turnout is often far less. And thus, the smaller percentage of those who do vote have a much greater sway in policy decisions. And this has important implications. Think of our COVID-19 issue right now. It more affects people of color, the poor, and the less well-educated. Precisely those who vote less, too. Now, the root word of both pandemic and democracy is demos, the people. We're interconnected, and to state it baldly, if we don't own the vote, then those few who do vote will own us. This is important to me. I served in the Army for 28 years and deployed many times overseas. And I want to think that the American people, or at least the majority of them, have a voice in where I go and what I do on their behalf. In Iraq, in 2010, I was present at a very important election. By the millions they came out to vote. They braved great danger and death, and hundreds did die, attacked by terrorists. And yet they voted and proudly showed their purple ink-stained fingers for the world to see. For me, it's personal. I realized how small this world is and that on our blue marble, we really are all the same. We want to be heard. Now, how did we get here? Well, in 1789, it was white men with property who could vote, a distinct minority. Then, after the Civil War, through 3 amendments, black men got the franchise, although they lost in the South with Jim Crow restrictions. In 1920, with the 19th Amendment, women received the franchise. And then in 1964-65, with the Civil and Voting Rights Acts, black Americans again got the vote in the South and throughout the country after 100 years. Finally, our last major enlargement of the vote came in 1971 when the age limit dropped to 18. Now, let's peel back the onion a bit and see who votes and who doesn't. By education, we find that those without a high school degree vote at about a 30% rate, while those with advanced degrees vote above 75%, 45% difference. By income, we find that those making less than $30,000 vote at a rate of about 40%, while those making more than $75,000 vote at a 75% rate. That's 35 percentage points higher. When we look at sex and age, we find that women have been voting at a slightly higher rate than men over the last few decades, but it's much more stark difference when we look at ages. Those under 34 vote at about a 50% or less rate, while those over 65 vote above 70% rate. Finally, in regard to race, whites and blacks both vote just slightly above 60%, while Asian Americans and Hispanics vote at about 32%. Again, a 30-point swing. All of these show major disparities in American voting participation. We're not hearing everyone's voice. It's like we're a choir, but we're missing an entire section, a bass, soprano, tenor. We can't sing as a nation without everyone's voice. And so, again, we have our proposals to make voting fair, feasible, and fun. Stella will now take us through universal voting.
Thank you, Brian, for giving us a comprehensive understanding of the history of the voting and make us know that throughout history, voter turnout has not been as high as it could. Now let me explain why the United States should make the voting system universal. In China, although we have the right to vote, it doesn't count. When I came to the United States, I found that many people don't care about their right to vote. It makes me confused because I think it's a very important thing, both for the country and for the individual. I think people should make good use of this right and cherish such an opportunity. In order to talk about why we should make voting universal, first let's talk about why Americans don't want to vote. According to a research, 44% of non-voters said they didn't vote because they cared little for political and public affairs. 26% of non-voters said they were resentful of politics or politicians and refused to vote. 25% of non-voters stayed away from politics because they were frustrated by the endless omnipresence of politics and the infiltration of money in contemporary general elections with advertisements and special interests. So, is it really difficult to get everyone to vote? It seems not. Among the 35 OECD member countries, the United States ranks 31st in turnout, while Australia tops the list, largely because of Australia's universal voting system. In the 27 elections since World War II, turnout in Australia has averaged 95%. While someone might argue that we only want people to vote who feel a strong desire to vote, we found that Australia rose up to the occasion with universal voting. The research shows that they take this obligation seriously. Their sense of civic duty makes them reluctant to cast uninformed ballots and inclines them to learn at least the basics about issues, parties, and candidates. A low turnout rate may make the American democratic system go into an endless circle. The more people hate politics, the less they vote. The fewer voters, the less the voice of the public will be expressed. Everyone should count in election. If some regularly vote while others don't, elected officials are likely to give less weight to the interests and views of non-participants. Last but not least, citizenship must strengthen in order to have a solid democracy. We all have the duty to help shape the country that has given us so much. Okay, that's all. Let's hand it over to Katie.
Thanks, Stella. So, instead of completely reinventing the wheel, we can also consider reforms to the current electoral system that will boost turnout, kind of like the low-hanging fruit option. This would include expansions to voting locations, early voting, and voting by mail. I actually started my career working on political campaigns, and I've seen firsthand how these systems work. As Brian noted, these systems currently result in an electorate that is older, whiter, wealthier, and not representative of the population at large. The changes I'm proposing will make casting a ballot more feasible for people with varying circumstances. People who work multiple jobs, people with disabilities, folks who are caretakers, and so on. One solution is increasing the number of polling places throughout the country. If we want more people to vote, let's create more spaces for them to do so. Currently, many facilities experience issues with long waiting times. Some voting centers have lines around the block, and people end up either waiting hours to cast their ballot or having to leave, thus forfeiting their right to vote. Imagine you only have a 30-minute window during your lunch break or between leaving work and picking up your kids at daycare. Having more polling place options and therefore shorter waiting times would make it more feasible for you to exercise your right. In many places, the needle is moving in the wrong direction on this issue. Across the country, cities and counties are closing polling places, citing budget concerns. In 2013, the Supreme Court overturned provisions of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Southern states with a history of voter suppression across racial lines used to have to get approval from the federal government before making any changes to their election-related policies. No more. Since the ruling, states have closed at least 1,688 polling places, many of them in Black and brown communities. And long lines are also an issue that largely impact communities of color. Studies using cell phone data have found that voters in predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods wait much longer to vote than their counterparts in white neighborhoods. What's at stake here is the integrity of our democracy. If we are a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, we need to take action and ensure election results truly and inclusively reflect all the people. Expanding early voting programs is another way to fit the needs of diverse communities and modern schedules. This is a mindset shift. Instead of an election day, it's an election period. Some states have polling places open for a 2-week window, and citizens can vote when it best fits their schedule. Studies estimate this helps boost turnout by about 4%. Early voting can also be conducted via mail. Instead of making people come out to vote, voting comes to people. Voting by mail was originally created as an absentee program for people who aren't in town on election day. 3 states have conducted their elections by mail as a default for a few election cycles now. Colorado has seen the greatest increase in turnout since introducing their program, and the 2 other states, Oregon and Washington, have stayed well above the nationwide average. But perhaps more telling as it relates to the potential increase in turnout, voters want to vote by mail. A recent poll by the Pew Research Center found 70% of Americans support absentee voting. Opponents of voting by mail argue that this will make our electoral system vulnerable to widespread fraud. But the truth is, voter fraud is extremely rare. States already conducting elections by mail as a default report very few incidents. They also serve as a testing lab. We can learn from what they have experienced and create better security measures. It will be expensive, but it's an investment in the will of the people. This very debate is playing out across daily headlines because of concerns about mass in-person voting in the times of the coronavirus. But pandemic or not, it's time we take action to make voting feasible for the masses so we can continue working towards a more perfect union together.
Thank you, Katie. On another side of the social spectrum, I grew up in Midwestern suburbia where I attended schools that supported voting. As a young woman in school, I couldn't believe the type of struggles women encountered. Chief among those was the right to vote. I knew once I was old enough I'd exercise this right to the fullest. Years later, our political environment is the most controversial it's ever been, yet our voter turnout was at a 20-year low in 2016. Whether voting is seen as unimportant or an inconvenience, there is a reason people aren't getting out to the polls. What's missing is the mindset that all voices are needed to make a difference. We need Americans to view voting as a responsibility instead of a burden. But what's more fun than responsibility? A celebration. To improve voter turnout, we should make Election Day a national holiday. A new holiday would instill pride in Americans. Even our former presidents partied on Election Day. George Washington provided 158 gallons of alcohol to voters during one Virginia election. Election Day, like Independence Day, could be a fun celebration of patriotism to motivate Americans to engage in this important duty. And using Pinterest for theme party ideas, we could take a page right out of Washington's book. What else do Americans care about? Making money. For tangible proof of the success of this solution, we can look at states that offer paid time off to vote. Currently, only about half of U.S. states have laws protecting the rights of workers to take unpaid time off. So think about it. If you have the choice to vote or put food on your family's table, what would you do? For the states that offer paid time off for voting, this benefit is effective. Several of these states were the 10 highest voting states in the last presidential election. Internationally, we see Election Day as a holiday, having the same positive effect. In their last election, South Korea and Israel experienced participation rates above 76%. Lastly, making Election Day a national holiday just makes sense for today's American families. Time is money, but taking the time to have a voice in our future is priceless. With today's competing priorities, American families have less time than ever. Getting out to the polls may not be a monetary issue. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, registered voters with household incomes of more than $150K are most likely to say they don't have time to vote. Making Election Day a national holiday would wind down the chaos for families to create an important moment in history. While one might argue that not all workers would have the opportunity to vote, as some industries look to capitalize on a holiday, companies are interested in supporting the cause. Patagonia, a well-respected outdoor retailer, paused its operations so employees could vote. We need to shift our mindset to improve voter turnout. Robert Cialdini says, After taking a stand, people view themselves as public-spirited citizens who acted on their civic principles. As Americans, we honor our pastimes. From charismatic cookouts to polling prediction parties, making Election Day a national holiday will reinvigorate our American spirit. After all, the Declaration of Independence shares our unalienable rights as Americans: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. What's more of a demonstration of happiness than a fun day of planning for the future of our nation?
Thank you, Danielle. Again, here are our proposals for fair, feasible, and fun changes to our voting system. As we go forward with these ideas, let's remember our past. In our declaration, we said that our government derived its power from the consent of the governed, from the people. And in our Constitution, we said we were aiming for a more perfect union. We're not perfect, but we strive to be. This country is a dream. This country is a promise. And hearing everyone's voice can help get us there. We all have a responsibility to bear in this, a responsibility to participate, to vote, to give our consent. As a people, a demos, we were uniquely created in 1776. We were then, have been, and remain a dream that others everywhere have aspired to. Let us not lose this last best hope of earth. Let's vote. And let us be proud to do so. Proud that on this big blue marble, we can be like our brothers and sisters everywhere. Proud to show our ink-stained fingers in appreciation of our responsibility. It's on us. To vote in change, we must change the way we vote. Thank you.